All right, so what to say about the Harry and Meghan situation that has not already been said? We are in week two now of this hostage crisis. We're all being held hostage. No, I'm joking. But seriously, I feel like it's some kind of like purgatory, like inverse purgatory that we're in now, where we are waiting for something to drop that's even more ridiculous than what came last week. The reviews of part one last week were pretty terrible across the board. The critics generally hated it. Audiences generally hated it. I mean, for one thing, it was really lackluster, right? You had, I mean, it was pretty boring. It was hard for me to get through all three episodes, quite frankly. It was kind of in this unfortunate no man's land between, on the one hand, not being interesting or controversial enough, right? So that I wanted to fall asleep and I was kind of like, And on the other hand, though, dropping just enough, infuriating misrepresentations and self serving, whining platitudes and so forth that it was distasteful in that way, right? So it's kind of like one of those movies, one of those movies where critics say it wasn't bad enough to be like a good bad, like, oh well, it was so bad that at least it was interesting, right? It was like watching a train wreck. It wasn't that bad, but then also like it was shitty, right? So you can't say it was actually a good movie either. And that's how I feel, I have to say, about everything that Meghan and Harry have done since they left the royal family, since Megxit, as it's called. I hate that term. But anyway, but I'm serious. I feel like everything that they have done since then, whether we're talking about that ridiculous, lukewarm podcast, Archwell or whatever, come on. Did Spotify really pay them $100 million for that tepid piece of shit? Really? Oh my God. And no, I haven't even been able to get through one of those podcast episodes, right? But everything that I've heard, it's just so like, it's just so vapid. It's just so vapid, insipid. Just look up, as in the thesaurus, every every synonym for blah, and that'll be accurate. So, there was that really just ridiculous and but just kind of like boring and dumb podcast. You've got, there are different sort of inexplicable appearances at like the United Nations in New York and different things where they're being given a platform, they're being invited to take the stage and share their wealth of wisdom, except they don't have a wealth of wisdom. I understand that Harry has had some unique and interesting experiences in his journey being a part of the royal family and what happened to his mom and all of that. But he long ago, I think, exhausted whatever, depth of insights he could provide to the public about that and anything that would be useful. And it really is just it just really feels like now every time that the thing with his mom gets brought up in a public way by him or by Meghan, it does feel sort of kind of, exploitive. And I don't, look, I'd make a YouTube channel where you could argue that I'm exploiting all kinds of things in the sense that I'm taking all kinds of, tragic events, or controversial events or misfortunes by other people, and I'm talking about them, right? But my issue with them is that they go around with this kind of sanctimonious, holier than thou air about them. They promote this idea that they're running away from the cameras, that they just want privacy. If we could just get people to leave us alone. We're so terrified. Even the mere idea that we might have to go without our security services for a little while, it fills us with so much fear because we know that our fame has brought us all of this horrible attention that someone is just waiting to hurt us, right? That's the attitude that they're promoting. And yet, as I said in my last video, when you look at actually what they've been doing, everything that they're doing is a quest for a higher profile. In fact, in this very documentary in which they claim that they want a lower profile and they're bemoaning the fact that they have such a high profile, in fact, what they are doing in the very act of making the documentary is they're seeking a higher profile. And again, I don't fault them for that, and I don't fault Harry for talking about what he's been through. But again, they have this very sort of hypocritical, self-serving, a paradoxical complex, right? Where they think that they're running from the limelight and they think that the media are after them and they think that they're having all of this attention forced on them. Well, at the same time, they're running toward it. And in a very obnoxious, sanctimonious way. Like they're not just seeking the limelight. They're not just seeking to up their profile, but they're doing so by way of it seems like carefully coordinated publicity campaign against the royal family, against Harry's family, against British, traditions, and against, frankly, not only against the media, which, I'm okay with that, but against the public. I mean, there's this idea sort of underlying a lot of what Harry and Meghan are complaining about, that part of what is feeding this beast is not just the media and it's not just the royal family that in some way are, conspiring against them or whatever, but also that it is a racism in the public, right? A bias in the public, you know? Who's reading these articles? Why do the media keep producing all of these articles that Meghan and Harry loathe? Well, the public are eating it up, right? So really, Harry and Meghan, their grievances extend beyond even the media. And I've talked before in the royal family, and I've talked before about how I understand to an extent critiquing the media. I feel like the media consistently get things wrong. I feel like they're very destructive often. Okay? So yeah, and I'm willing to get on board with that idea, but I'm not willing to get on board with the idea that Meghan and Harry in particular are targeted because of Meghan's race, or that they have it any worse than any of the other royals did. As I've said before, the other royals got their time in the barrel with the media. I'm not saying that that's right, but I'm saying that is true. And I'm not on board with the idea that Harry and Meghan are promoting that um, that the media killed Harry's mother. I understand that was a terrible trauma, but look in my other videos and I explain why that is just not an accurate portrayal of why Diana ultimately died. And then the last thing I want to say is I'm not on board with Harry and Meghan's hypocrisy in promoting this idea that that the media are destroying them, and yet not acknowledging that they are seeking in every way they can to get their message across and to hurt others' images in the process. They've done so many things. That Oprah interview was so destructive to the royal family and the image of the royal family. And you know how destructive it was because Prince William, he felt compelled at the time to make a rare statement, verbal statement, audible statement, rebutting it. Do you remember William and Catherine and some of the others, I believe, were at church? This was after the Oprah interview came out, and they were at church. And as the photographers, as the tabloids, the media do, they said, they shouted and they said, "Are you a racist family?" Right? Because that's what Harry and Meghan had promoted. That's the idea they had promoted to a degree in their interview. And nobody was expecting William to say anything because protocol is that you don't talk to the media, and that talking to the media stokes the fire, makes it worse, and also that it's unseemly for a future king to be getting in kind of maybe a tete-a-tete of words with a photographer or a journalist or whatever, right? And so nobody was expecting him to say anything, but he actually stopped. I think Catherine kept going, right? But he actually stops and he says something like, "We are very much not a racist family." So yeah, so even he felt the need to rebut that, and so based on what I'm seeing, with the ads for the second part of this documentary coming out in a couple of days, the ads that I've seen that you've seen, Meghan complains about how I was not just thrown to the wolves, I was fed to the wolves. Okay, well, I don't understand some kind of a pedantic difference there, between these two things. Thrown to the wolves, fed to the wolves. Okay, whatever. I mean, I hate to say this. Well, I don't actually. She is extremely polished and she is a good actress and she is good at her. She has a very lovely demeanor, and there are ways in which I am envious of her. I wish that I had her presentation skills at times because she's so polished, she's so graceful, right? Whereas I just feel like I'm kind of like this sort of like kinetic, hyperactive, or like really sort of depressed, all over the place type person. Like I'm either like really energetic, I'm on, or I'm like, but right, but I never am that like just really nicely polished woman, and I wish I could be. But she's got that going for her. But underneath that, I just from what I have read, and I've read a lot about her now, and what I've observed, I don't think that she is a particularly well educated or insightful person. I think that she's definitely got some smarts about her to have gotten where she's gotten. And I think she's got excellent presentation skills and has a kind of cunning about her, but I don't see evidence that she has any particular great insights to give to anybody. She got a sort of a very, basic education at garden variety education in college, which is fine. But as we all know, those of us who've been to college, you don't getting 4 years of college doesn't mean that you're educated. In fact, a lot of people can go through 4 years of college and really have taken very little from it, right? And so what I get from her and the political ideas that she promotes and the things that she has said and the things that she has written is that, and also Harry too, is that these are two people who they don't really have deeper insights or deeper knowledge about the world. And yet they think that they do in a very narcissistic sense, and they're sort of passing themselves off as these voices for different things, that different movements and causes, but no one really cares. Very few people care to hear their opinions on these things. And a number of people have pointed out that the paradox, the conundrum for Harry and Meghan is that even now, their popularity or their acclaim or their notoriety, the reason why anyone would want to listen to them at all comes from their proximity to the royal family and to the monarchy and to that institution and its history and all that we associate with it. And so, but here's the thing, they're wanting to get far away from that, and yet they're wanting to retain that sense of notoriety or credibility or that sense of gravitas or why people would care about them at all, right? In and of themselves, and Andrea Burkhart and I discussed this. Check out one of the interviews that I did with attorney Andrea Burkhart. It's also on my Royal Family playlist, linked below. But in and of themselves, they're okay people, and she's attractive, and he's attractive, and they have a certain polish about them. But in and of themselves, there's just nothing to justify them being famous apart from that family situation and that institution. So they're stuck in a real bind with that. However, that's not to say that they're without options. It's like they seem to, in a very sort of, extreme sort of dialectic in their mind, extreme dichotomous scenario. They seem to think that either they have to be at war with the royal family and running away from it, or they have to be like right there, and I think that they could find a middle ground in that. They could continue to live in California, or they could continue to not be working royals, but they don't have to go on this media campaign. But then again, maybe they do, because again, who really, apart from hearing them dish about the royal family or their issues with the royal family, who really cares to hear what they have to say? So I guess in a way, they're kind of doing the only thing that they feel is open to them. But, I do want to suggest something else. It takes more time, it requires more patience, but you can, Harry and Meghan, I actually think that you can, over time, build a sense of credibility by not promoting yourself so much, and maybe by actually going quiet a little bit. And if you want to do charity work or whatever you want to do, or find things to get involved in life, then do that. But maybe this sort of extreme kind of grasping for any kind of influence that you can get, speaking at the UN or doing this dumb podcast that's really, it's like basically like it's like Sweet and Low or something. Like there's no real substance there. Maybe doing these that really acrimonious interview on Oprah, or this documentary where you come off sounding like, I don't know, like a character. They sound like characters from The White Lotus. If you've seen The White Lotus on HBO, it's a really good show and it's really funny. I'm watching the second season right now. I haven't seen the first. I decided to go with the second season because people said it was darker. But it's a bunch of, in this show, it's a bunch of very wealthy and entitled and existentially confused people who don't realize like how out of touch they are with, quote unquote, normal life or whatever. And there's a lot more going on. But I'm just saying that I do feel like Harry and Meghan are like characters from the White Lotus, and they're here, in their sort of their resort of a life. And I know it's not perfect, and I know what he went through with his mom, and some of the stuff he's been through with, the royal family and whatever. I do think that that family has its issues, certainly, and that it can be cold. Although Charles wasn't cold, he apparently doted on Harry and raised him with a lot of warmth. But I get the critiques, but still, as I said in my earlier videos, I still think that Meghan and Harry, not just financially, but in so many different ways, have it so much better than normal people with normal problems, or at least not any worse. But they're like these characters from the White Lotus, where they're here at this palatial resort, and they're having everything given to them, and they're just, but they're existentially they're miserable, and they think that they're in some kind of a hellish life, right? Or just perpetually dissatisfied or whatever, and they're complaining to everybody around them, you know. And so I don't think, to get back to what I was saying, I don't think that all of that is necessary or helpful. And I think if they want to build credibility in the long term, they should let their profile lower a little. Actually, just invest in your lives. Do things that are helpful even when or that are fulfilling even when the cameras are not around. And then after people have are not so sick of you, after people have kind of gotten over these childish tantrums that you've thrown, maybe people will be more willing then to accept you on your own terms and listen to you and get involved in whatever you're trying to get involved in life. I don't know. I don't know the answer, but it's not the way that they've approached it so far. That's for sure. So anyway, I think that, and maybe I'll talk about this in another video. I am former English professor, literature professor. I've taught classes in literature, film, philosophy, even history. And I do think, and maybe I'll talk about this in a future video this week, but I do think that if we want to look for literary allusions, like first of all, they both think that they're living in some kind of a Greek tragedy, and they're not, or a Shakespearean tragedy, and they're not. So that's part of what's annoying about this, is that they think that there's all of this, that there's all of this stuff that's happened to them and been done to them in their life, worthy of all this pathos. And again, I understand that they've had issues like with his mom and stuff that have at times been profound, but again, this very sort of aggrieved sense of like, how could any of this happen to me, or how could people criticize us or say that we're hypocritical, or what, like how dare anyone have any critiques about us, even though we're putting ourselves in the public eye and we're lecturing people and all of that, right? I do think though that they think they're living in some kind of a Greek tragedy or whatever, and they're wanting everyone to join in with that, and you'll feel sorry for them. But and I would say, if we're wanting to use allusions to tragedy here, I do think that Harry thinks that he is living in a kind of a Hamlet play, and that instead of avenging the ghost of his dead father, he's avenging the ghost of his dead mother in myriad ways, and he's found a reincarnation of the dead mother, in this instance in Meghan, which is basically what he says in the documentary last week. But he thinks he's avenging his dead mother's ghost, and he's waging a kind of a war, subtle or not so subtle, against the media and against the royal family and against Charles and against his, and even against the supposedly racist British public. But instead of being in Hamlet, he's not the hero of Hamlet, in my opinion. In fact, I think that he's stuck in the play Macbeth. I think that's where he's stuck, and he's stuck in the role of Macbeth, and he doesn't realize it. And no, I don't think Harry's killing anybody, having anyone killed or whatever, like Macbeth did, right? He didn't stab the king or anything. And I don't think that Meghan is quite on par with Lady Macbeth. But I do think that there are some similar dynamics in that which you find at the beginning of Macbeth, and I'll talk more about this in a future video, but at the beginning of Macbeth, you find someone who is actually in a pretty great situation, or at least one where he's revered and he has a certain degree of contentment and whatever. And then he's told that he deserves better. He was meant to be the king, not just to be the second most, powerful or the second most popular person in the realm, as the Thane of Cawdor, but no, he's meant to be the king. And who does he have in his ear? Lady Macbeth telling him, you deserve this, you deserve this, don't be a pussy, you should do this, you should do this. And so, I don't know. I just think it's interesting. It's an interesting dynamic that he's got going with Meghan, and I'm not entirely still sure what to make of it. But I do think that it's much more of Macbeth going on here. If we want to, if we, okay, Harry, if you want to think, you and Meghan, if you want to think that you're stuck in a Shakespearean tragedy, I think you're stuck in Macbeth and not in Hamlet, right? And maybe some Oedipus thrown in as well. I talk about that in my last video. Maybe I'll talk about the Oedipus story again and how it relates to Harry in an upcoming video. Anyway, if you like what I've had to say here, you find it interesting, then check out my playlist on Harry and Meghan and the royal family below. Check out my other videos on philosophy, psychology, other celebrity stuff. I've all got all kinds of cool things. And as always, if you got something out of this or you were just entertained, at least, I always appreciate tips, and the links are below. All right. Bye, everybody.